Okay, so let's actually jump into the Euthyphro now. So the Euthyphro starts out, and Euthyphro and Socrates run into each other, and Socrates asks what Euthyphro's doing, essentially on his way to the courthouse. And Euthyphro says he's there to charge his father with manslaughter, because his father let one of his workers die while he was awaiting orders. So this worker had killed one of the father's slaves. The father tied up the worker, threw him in a ditch, and was waiting for word from the authorities on what he was supposed to do with the worker who had committed murder. And while he was waiting to hear from the authorities, the worker died in the ditch. So Euthyphro is going to bring charges against his father for manslaughter. And Socrates thinks this is really interesting, right? So Socrates asks Euthyphro, you must be pretty confident in your knowledge of, number one, the law, but also about piety. Because it's hard enough to bring charges like this against anybody, but to have the confidence to bring them against your own father, which is that's a big no-no in Athenian society, right? You don't bring charges against your family members. So to bring this charge against your father, you must really understand piety, right? You must understand what it is to serve the gods, right? That's what piety is. We'll attempt to get a definition throughout, but roughly it has to do something with our actions connecting to the gods, right? What it is to be pious. And this is especially interesting for Socrates because, as you heard in the last video, he has been charged by the city of Athens with being impious. And so he says, Euthyphro, we have to talk about this. I have to understand piety the way you do. Maybe if I understand piety the way you do, I'll be able to get out of this charge of impiety against me. Right? So Socrates has an interest here in what's going on. And so Euthyphro says, yeah, of course, I'm an expert on these matters, and I know what piety is. And so then we go down the rabbit hole. Hopefully you've already read the dialogue. Go back and read it if you haven't. But yeah, after he says, okay, yes, I know what piety is, we slowly go down this rabbit hole. And so Socrates says, okay, enlighten me. Let me know what piety is. And so the first definition that Euthyphro gives, and just so you know, I'll include in a short little summary below this video the 4 definitions that are given, as well as a very quick description of why those definitions fail. So you don't have to keep going back to this video. But the big, long, detailed explanation will be in this video. So make sure you keep watching. Otherwise, you won't understand the notes below. Okay, so the first definition Euthyphro gives is to say, okay, well, prosecuting the wrong is pious. And when you fail to prosecute the wrong, that's impious. And so he's essentially saying, hey, what I'm doing in regards to my father right now is a pious act because I am prosecuting the wrong that my father did. So I'm acting in a pious way. That's a great example of piety. So now you know what piety is, Socrates. And Socrates says, wait, that can't be quite right. There's something wrong with this definition. It's not a definition at all, right? So Euthyphro, you've attempted to give me a definition, but you failed miserably. You've only given me one instance of what piety is. Right? You've said, do what I'm doing. Here's an example. Prosecute wrongdoing. But that's not enough to give us a definition, right? So a definition would give us general enough terms to where we could look at a number of different actions across the spectrum and say, okay, that's pious, that's impious, that's pious, that's impious, right? We can't do that with what Euthyphro's given us so far. But Euthyphro's given us so far, all we know is, okay, prosecute the wrong. That's one good example. So he says, Euthyphro, you haven't given me a definition at all. A definition will make it clear to us what all the instances of piety have in common. So we need, essentially he's saying, I don't want an example, I want a general definition. Okay, so now you're starting to see Socrates is worried about these universal definitions, right? The subjective fact that we can get by looking to the definitions of words. Okay, so he says, Euthyphro, please, I'm sure you understand what you're doing. You just weren't ready for the degree of certainty I'm looking for. Give it another shot. And Euthyphro goes, yes, I'm up to the challenge. I know what piety is. Okay, so here's my second definition. What's pleasing to the gods is pious. What they hate is impious. And says, okay, well now we actually have a full definition. Right? This isn't just an example or an instance. We have a full definition we can apply to every case. We can look at the world and see which different instances of actions are pious or impious. So good, now we at least have a definition to start working with. So pious actions are those that are pleasing to the gods. Impious actions are those that the gods hate or dislike. Take a second to yourself and think, why is this definition bad, right? Socrates, I mean, if you've already done the reading, hopefully you understand it already, but Socrates thinks, okay, you've given me a definition, but this is a bad definition. The gods, especially if you go back to ancient Greek culture, remember, they have a pantheon of gods. It's not just the one single god, right? It's not the Christian conception or the Western Christian conception. It is this pantheon of gods. And this pantheon of gods, you can read all sorts of stories about how they are pretty human. They have a lot of similarities with humanity in that they disagree with one another, they argue, they have flaws, right? They're not all perfect. Some are open to wrath, some are emotionally weak. And this is really important for the definition we're talking about. Socrates says, okay, well, notice this. We can have two different gods who disagree on some subject now. And so let's go back to prosecuting your father, right? So you can have one God who loves that action, right? He thinks prosecuting the wrong, even if it's against a family member, I love it. And so that means, under this definition we're talking about, it would be pious. But now on the other hand, you can have another God who hates prosecuting the wrong when it's against your family members. So now that action is impious. But now hopefully you see we have a contradiction, right? If it's really just up to what the gods love and hate, but the gods disagree, then the same action can be both pious and impious at the same time. But that's a contradiction. That's absurd, right? So this definition, this second definition that Euthyphro has given us, is a bad definition because it leads us into an absurdity. It allows an action to have contradictory properties at the same time. And Euthyphro very quickly says, okay, no, I understand. I see where I made a mistake. What I meant to say is piety is what all the gods love. Impiety is what they all hate. And once again, Socrates says, okay, yeah, we've made some progress, right? We've finally gotten over the hump. We have a definition. This one doesn't seem to be clearly contradictory anymore, right? Because if all the gods love it, then there's no contradiction. It can't have two properties at the same time. So we have to just survey the gods. If they all love something, then we know that it's pious. If they all hate it, we know it's impious. But there won't be disagreement over any single act. So no contradiction. Unfortunately, as you know by now, Socrates finds a flaw with this definition as well. And this one's a little bit harder to understand, so make sure you go back and read this section again in the text, and you might need to watch this a couple times, but try and get a grip on this. So he asks Euthyphro, okay, well, do the gods love it because it's pious? Or is it pious because it's loved by the gods? So if you need to, go into your Google search bar and type in Euthyphro's dilemma, and this will give you some information about this topic that we're discussing right now. So, is some act pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it is pious? And it can't just be, and Socrates says, okay, well, let's think about this. It can't be the first. It can't be the case that it's pious because the gods love it. Because then the action was never actually pious in the first place, right? What happened was all the gods got together and loved it, and then we just called that pious, right? We're not getting at the essence of piety, right? So we can still ask, well, all the gods, it's pious because all the gods love it, but what is it about these actions that they love, right? And you can't just say piety again there, or you're arguing in a circle. So essentially, this just falls back in on itself, and we're just back to the beginning asking ourselves, well, what makes it pious, right? Sure, it's that all the gods love it, but why do they love it? We still don't have the essence, right? So we still can't take this definition and really figure out what things are pious or impious in the world. Okay, good. But now we go to the other horn of the dilemma and we say, okay, well, the gods love it because it's pious. Well, hopefully you see immediately we're stuck with a pretty big problem, right? It seems like we haven't given any definition for piety. It seems like we're saying, okay, well, the gods love it because it's pious. Well, then the love of the gods isn't the thing that's making it pious, right? It was already pious. Whatever this action is, it was already pious. And so now we still, once again, are lacking this essence, right? So on the first, it seems like we're stuck with this sort of arbitrary definition. We don't have the essence because the gods can just change their mind about what they love. And so things can become pious or impious at a whim. So we're losing an essence in one sense there. And on the other hand, we haven't even really given any indication of what the essence might be for piety. Because it was already pious before the gods loved it. So now we just need to ask the further question, well, what is it then that makes it pious in order for the gods to love it? Okay, so that's the third definition. Then we get to the fourth, right? And the fourth is just, okay, well, piety and justice or just action are just the same thing. And here Socrates says, okay, well, once again, that can't be right. Because there are more just actions than there are pious actions. So they can't be the same class of things, right? Piety can't equal justice if the pious actions, say there are only 100 pious actions, but there are 3,000 just actions. So what could be an example of that? Well, you might think the runnings of the state, right? So how the government treats its people is a matter of justice, but that wouldn't be a matter of piety. Right, so just right there, we have a counterexample to the definition that justice equals piety. Okay, and so those are the four definitions they go over. We've reached the end of the dialogue, and we have no idea what the definition of piety is. And Euthyphro, sort of in a huff, he's disgruntled at this point, walks away and says, I have stuff I need to get to, right? He's on his way to court to charge his father. And Socrates hits him with those little jabs as he's running away. Right, saying, oh no, but you're such an expert, what am I going to do without your knowledge? Right, I have to get this knowledge of piety. So in that sense, you can see how Socrates was annoying the statesman, right? Corrupting the youth, annoying the statesman. But we end up with no definition for piety. And so now what we have to do, and we'll do this next week when we look at Plato, is find out if Socrates' project is even worthwhile, right? So is this project, can it go anywhere? Can we actually find these universal definitions? And we'll talk about that next time. Thank you.